We are at New Horizons Disability Empowerment Center in Prescott Valley, Arizona, and we wanted to celebrate the anniversary of the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990 by chatting with someone who actually lived through those times. We're speaking with Ken Edwards, who had his own involvement in helping to get this law passed and also knew some of the major players, such as Justin Dart on the East Coast and Ed Roberts on the West Coast. Ken, you were saying you felt it is important that we remember the history of what came before the passage of the ADA, both the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and then almost 10 years later, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So let's start by looking back to the 1960s, a time of national outcry and protests against the discrimination taking place. However, you mentioned that with the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it didn't really solve situations for people with disabilities. Could you tell us more about that?
That particular act, which was encompassed the disability rights as part of the group, didn't cover disabilities. It only covered women and minorities. So yeah, there was still, the disability community was still left out. So we had a lot of work to do. You mentioned Ed Roberts and Justin Dart. And I've met both of them. Ed, I went to college with for a while. He had one of the first power wheelchairs, which his dad helped him make. He worked for a aircraft manufacturer in Long Beach. And I'd hook onto the back of Ed's wheelchair a couple of times, and he'd tug me clear across campus, 80 miles an hour it seemed like, you know. I was in a manual at the time. So that's, yeah, I go back, and they were both very active in helping get eventually the ADA passed. So you mentioned the 60s, and you know, there was a lot of disability, or there was a lot of groups of people, disenfranchised groups. The Black Panthers, black people came up in arms, and I don't know if you recall or not, but most of Watts in the LA area was burned up. So there was a big uprising, and that stirred across the whole country about inequities in our government and in our world of living. But you know, it really wasn't until the Rehab Act of 1972, and specifically Section 504 of that act, that we actually got some specifics related to disabilities. The thing with the 504 and the Rehab Act is that the non-discrimination part in that, which was civil rights part, only applied to recipients of federal financial assistance. So that meant colleges and companies with federal grants and things of that nature were only required to not discriminate. So here it left the whole private sector, you know, the grocery stores, all of those places. I applied for a job one time, and they said, "Oh, we don't hire the handicapped." They wouldn't do that today. You know, it didn't cover any of the private sector. It's only related to federal funded entities, whether it was with a grant or things like the post office and things like that, that had to comply with the requirements for access to their facilities. I was a district director for disability services in the community college system in California. And in that position, part of my role was to advocate and to take messages from our development of disability services programs in the state to different senators and different representatives in the White House or in Washington. So I was there, and I met a friend of mine who was an attorney in Palos Verdes, and he was on the Architectural and Transportation Barriers Board. And I sat in on a meeting at his request, and they were talking about access, about doors, and about this and about that. And I just said, you know, you not only have to get in, you have to be able to use what it is that's in there. And somebody said, oh, accessible to and usable by. So that was quite, to see that in the law. I don't know if it was because I said it, but they might have had it anyway. But anyway, I feel like I was somewhat involved in helping get that little phrase put in there. And of course, it had a lot of confrontation and went through a ton of rewrites. Everybody was politically trying to water it down, to take this out, take that out. And every little move like that just brought the community, the disabilities community, and those people that were disenfranchised back into power. And so it was an inundation of visits and calls and letters, and it literally overwhelmed Washington to the point that they said, okay, we have something major here, and it certainly is a civil rights issue. So ADA finally passed. I think it passed in 1990, but it wasn't activated till about 1992 or 3 in terms of getting all the regulations and stuff like that put in place. There was not any enforcement in terms of saying you haven't got it done. And in fact, when we look today, we still find a lot of entities that are not in compliance that should have been many, many years ago. The ADA's gone through several rewrites and updates since its original passage, and the challenges in court and stuff like that have almost all found in favor of the civil rights of people with disabilities. Because this controversy, if we'll call it that, had been going on since the first passage of 504, which again only covered recipients of federal financial assistance. All of the rest of the society and the businesses and everything were left out of it. So in the interim, the people in the movement had developed attorneys and organizations and real advocacy power. So when ADA was getting into a stalled situation, a lot of us then visited Washington. I can recall marching on the White House. A little before that, in 504, we were in downtown Los Angeles protesting on the federal building in Wilshire Boulevard. The folks up in Berkeley, I think they were chained themselves to the walls. Some got arrested. It was just really, it was an amazing time to see people demand their civil rights, and to have been able to be there and see the success of that, and to look today at ADA's pervasive benefit for every person with every type of disability. It's just a marvelous success. It's a grand thing that we need to be grateful for. We need to appreciate all of the people that did all of the work to get that passed. It's a wonderful piece of legislation. If ADA means anything, it means that people with disabilities no longer out of sight, out of mind. It says it's based on people wanting to go to work, being able to go to work, wanting to participate in the community, being able to participate in the community. And segregation is never going to be tolerated again. I'd like to personally thank the ADA and all the people who helped pass it.